Alibaba just did something the AI industry has been pretending was impossible. On April 22, 2026, the Qwen team at Alibaba quietly released Qwen3.6-27B. No press conference, no CEO interview on CNBC, no staged demo in front of investors. Just a model card on Hugging Face, a blog post, and a link to download the weights. Apache 2.0 license. Free. Yours to deploy on your own hardware. And the numbers it posted are genuinely shocking. Qwen3.6-27B is a 27 billion parameter dense model. That is roughly the size a reasonable enthusiast can run on a single gaming GPU. A high-end RTX 4090 can load it after quantization and serve it with real throughput. You do not need a data center. You do not need a cluster. You need one graphics card. Now watch what that card can do. On SWE Bench Verified, which measures whether a model can fix real software bugs from real GitHub repositories, Qwen3.6-27B scored 77.2%. Claude Opus 4.6 scored 80.8%. A 27 billion parameter open-source model from Alibaba is within 3.6 points of the most expensive closed model Anthropic sells. On Terminal Bench 2.0, which measures whether a model can autonomously execute complex command line workflows, Qwen3.6-27B scored 59.3%. That matches Claude 4.5 Opus exactly. And here's the part that broke the Chinese AI discourse all week. Qwen3.6-27B outperforms Qwen3.5-397B. Not by a little. On several agentic coding benchmarks, the 27 billion parameter dense model beats a 397 billion parameter mixture of experts model that Alibaba shipped 4 months ago. Same company, same team. Replaced by a model 15 times smaller. Let that sit for a second, because it has implications that are going to take the whole AI industry a month to fully digest. The implication is that the trillion-parameter arms race is not the only game anymore. Dense architectures trained the right way, with the right data, with the right training objective, can beat sparse mixture of experts behemoths on the benchmarks that actually matter for agentic coding. That flips the assumption underneath roughly half the money OpenAI and Anthropic have raised in the last 2 years. The community noticed. The Hugging Face discussion page filled up with developers calling it the new king of open-source agentic AI. The Hacker News post hit the front page with over 691 points and more than 339 comments. Simon Willison wrote it up. LM Studio and Olama both had quantized builds available within hours of release. But the community also noticed something else. Alibaba compared Qwen3.6-27B to Claude 4.5 Opus. Claude 4.6 Opus was already out. Several commenters called that benchmarking choice convenient at best and deceptive at worst. Against Claude 4.6, the coding gap is wider. The terminal bench match becomes a terminal bench loss. So what is the actual verdict? Let us look at the numbers without the marketing. On agentic coding, Qwen3.6-27B is legitimately strong. 77.2 on SWE Bench Verified, 59.3 on Terminal Bench 2.0, 1487 on Qwen Web Bench, which is Alibaba's own benchmark for web agent tasks. These are frontier numbers by any reasonable standard. On pure reasoning benchmarks, the picture is less dominant. The model is strong, but it is not the best in class. You are not going to pick Qwen3.6-27B over a frontier closed model for complex scientific reasoning or advanced math proofs. Where it shines is in one very specific lane: agentic coding on consumer hardware. That is the pitch, and the benchmarks back it up. The architecture is where things get interesting. Qwen3.6-27B uses a hybrid attention layout called Gated DeltaNet plus Gated Attention. Across 64 layers, 3 out of every 4 sublayers use a linear attention mechanism instead of traditional full attention. That design trades a little bit of expressiveness for a lot of speed and memory efficiency at long context. Hidden dimension of 5120. Intermediate feed-forward dimension of 17408. Multi-token prediction is enabled at serving time to speed up decoding. The context window ships at 262,144 tokens natively, extensible up to 1,010,000 tokens. That is a 1,000,000 token context window on a model you can run locally. A year ago, that would have been a science fiction spec sheet. And then there is thinking preservation. This is new. The model retains reasoning traces across conversation turns, which means in a multi-turn agentic workflow, it does not have to regenerate the same scratchpad over and over. That reduces redundant token generation and improves key-value cache efficiency. For anyone running long-horizon coding agents, that is a material operational improvement, not a marketing gimmick. Now the cost. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable for the closed model companies. Qwen3.6-27B is free, Apache 2.0. You download the weights, you run them on your hardware, you owe Alibaba nothing. On hosted inference through OpenRouter and similar providers, the Qwen 3.6 Plus tier is listed at roughly 33 cents per million input tokens and $1.95 per million output tokens. Compare that to Claude Opus 4.6, which costs $5 per million input tokens and $25 per million output tokens. Qwen 3.6 Plus comes in at about 6.5% of the input price and about 8% of the output price. For the exact same benchmark territory in agentic coding. If you are a developer building a coding agent and paying the bill yourself, the cost math is not close. Qwen is 15 to 20 times cheaper on the API, or completely free if you have a graphics card. On consumer hardware, the story is equally compelling. Quantized to 4-bit precision, Qwen 3.6-27B fits in about 14 gigabytes of VRAM. A 4090 with 24 gigabytes handles it comfortably, with room for a long context. A 3090 works. 2 RTX 5090s in a workstation serve it at full precision with headroom to spare. Developers on Hacker News reported running inference at over 200 tokens per second on modest consumer setups. This is what open source catching up looks like. At production quality. In a package a hobbyist can deploy. Now let me tell you what this release is actually about, because the benchmarks are the surface. For the last 18 months, the dominant narrative in American AI has been that frontier capability requires scale. Specifically, scale only a handful of companies can afford. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Meta, xAI. Hundreds of billions of dollars in compute, thousands of engineers, massive custom data centers. That story is the entire justification for OpenAI's $1 trillion IPO plan, for Anthropic's $100 billion AWS deal, for the White House framework prioritizing U.S. chip exports. Qwen 3.6-27B is a direct counter-argument to that story. A 27 billion parameter dense model, trained by a team most Americans have never heard of, distributed for free under a permissive license, performs within striking distance of frontier closed models on the benchmarks that enterprise buyers are starting to pay attention to. That does not invalidate the scale story entirely. The absolute frontier is still a big model game, but it means the gap between frontier closed and accessible open has collapsed to something that matters less in practice than the news cycle suggests. And that matters for a few reasons. First, the geopolitics. Alibaba is a Chinese company. The Qwen team operates inside Chinese AI policy constraints. The model was trained inside China, by Chinese engineers, released by a Chinese lab. And the West's AI labs cannot stop a user in Ohio from downloading the weights tomorrow morning. Apache 2.0 means there is no kill switch, no terms of service leverage, no geographic restriction. The export controls the US has layered onto frontier chips do not apply to weights already sitting on Hugging Face. The weights are out. They are staying out. Second, the competitive implications. DeepSeek v4 already rattled the AI establishment earlier this quarter with a cheaper competitive model. Qwen 3.6-27B raises the stakes because it is not just cheaper, it runs on hardware the average developer already owns. The people who were hedged on cloud dependency have a real domestic option now, just not a domestic American option. Third, the speed. 6 months ago, a 27 billion parameter dense model was not considered a serious agentic coding platform. The Qwen team took the idea from rumor to production weights in under 2 quarters. Their release cadence has accelerated roughly as fast as OpenAI's has, which is saying something. There is one honest caveat worth flagging. The benchmarks Alibaba reports were run using Alibaba's own internal agent scaffolding. Independent third-party reproductions are still limited as of the end of this week. The SWE bench verified score of 77.2 is plausible, consistent with a strong model, consistent with what independent testers have seen in early spot checks. But the gap between marketing numbers and independent numbers tends to compress on closer inspection, not expand. Budget for that. Even with that caveat, this is a real moment. The open source frontier is now within a few points of the closed source frontier on coding and agentic tasks, and it is being pushed there not by an American lab, but by a Chinese one. The question every developer, enterprise, and investor should be asking this week is simple. If a 27 billion parameter open model can reach this level, what stops the next release from closing the gap completely? Nothing. That is the answer. Stay sharp. Jane Sterling, Sterling Intelligence.